joining us this morning to take a closer look at where things stand. Associate editor at The Hill, Niall Stanage. Niall, thanks for being here. So the announcement, not really a surprise. I'm wondering, though, will Biden take aim at Trump during this announcement? What are you hearing?
I'm not sure that he will take explicit aim at him, Marni, but clearly the president's strategy is to paint the Republican Party as extreme and as disconnected from the American people's mainstream concerns. He often does that talking about ultra-MAGA Republicans, for example. So I think that will be part of the appeal of his campaign, irrespective of whether he uses that particular phrase or goes after President Trump, former President Trump himself, in his announcement.
Officially, you've got Marianne Williamson, who ran against Biden in 2020. You've got Robert F. Kennedy Jr., son of the former senator, who have announced that they will formally challenge President Biden. Did they or anyone else offer a real legitimate challenge at this point?
I don't think so, honestly, and the reason's pretty simple. It is extraordinarily difficult, Marni, to challenge an incumbent president from your own party and to have any success in doing so. In fact, the recent historical parallels, to the extent that they exist, tend to suggest that you would actually wound the president of your own party. That's what happened back in 1992 in the Republican Party when Pat Buchanan challenged President George H.W. Bush. And if you go all the way back to 1980, Ted Kennedy challenged President Jimmy Carter on the Democratic side. Both the challengers lost in the primary. Both the presidents went on to lose in the general election. I think Democrats are cognizant of those parallels.
So according to some of the numbers, 26% of Americans would like to see Biden run again. His approval rating right now, though, Niall, 39%, pretty low. How do Democrats feel about him?
I think they have mixed feelings. Some, I think, have feelings of foreboding because there are real questions, and it's not just about the president's age. You mentioned the approval ratings. They're pretty tepid, to say the least. Then there's the question of, can he inspire voters? Can he bring out those key Democratic blocs? Young people, voters of colour, are they going to rally around the Biden flag, as it were? That's not by any means certain. And I think, to circle back to what we were talking about a moment ago, that's why you'll see the president trying to suggest that the alternative is worse. He often talks about comparing him to the alternative, not to the almighty. And I think that's a line we're going to hear quite a lot of in the months to come.
Well, and you bring up age, and it's important to talk about. I mean, Biden is 80 right now. He'd be 86 at the end of his second term. Trump, to be fair, is 76. He'd be 82 at the end of his next term. He's the front runner, so I use him as an example. Should that be an issue for Americans' health and age?
I think yes, honestly. I mean, obviously, you want to know that someone can do the job. It is not a disqualifier in and of itself. But President of the United States is the most important and perhaps the most demanding job in the world. I think it is legitimate to wonder whether someone who, if elected to a second term and to finish that term, would be 86 at the conclusion of the second term, is capable of dealing with those pressures. Now, of course, the White House and the president himself would say, yes, he wants to be judged by his performance. But it's not only Republicans or conservatives who have concerns. Those concerns are pretty widespread, I think.
And you look at what challenges President Biden may face next time around. I mean, you've got foreign policy. He has been criticized for the U.S. troop withdrawal in Afghanistan. We were talking about just a moment ago. The war in Ukraine rages on. Tensions with China have probably never been higher than they are right now. How does he answer for some of what's happening globally?
I think that his argument is that you have to manage all of these challenges. I mean, if you think only of China, for example, he talks about the idea that it can be a competitive relationship, but not necessarily one that escalates into conflict. His argument, in essence, is, as someone who has been part of the political picture here in this country for a generation, he is familiar with these issues, familiar sometimes with the individual leaders, familiar with the levers of power that you can use to make things happen. Do voters buy that? That's a much different question, but that's his argument.
On the Republican side, Trump, as I mentioned, the front runner by pretty large margins, according to some of the polls, if you read into those. Is it possible that DeSantis waits to run as a result of what we're seeing?
It's a really good question, and there are some murmurs of that in Washington. I personally find it hard to imagine him doing so. My view is, in politics, sometimes you have to seize your moment. You have to go when the tide is at its height. And I think that for Governor DeSantis, even though he is lagging in polls at the moment, that he has to kind of go this year. It's all very well saying, yes, he could wait. Yes, maybe 4 years would be different. But you can get scuffed up in 4 years as well. You can lose your luster as a potential candidate. So I would be very, very surprised if he doesn't run this year.
Right. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.